The Alabama Booksmith presents Author Spotlight. Because every book in our store is signed, our Wall of Fame displays a breathtaking array of writers and signatures. Close-up shots reveal giants of literature, acclaimed historians, stars of stage and screen, our nation's leaders, famous sports heroes, and thousands of other esteemed authors. Today's Wall of Fame guest is Towne O'Neill, who will discuss his new book, Down Along with That Devil's Bones, A Reckoning with Monuments, Memory, and the Legacy of White Supremacy. And here's Towne O'Neill with our host, Jake Reese.
Well, hello, Connor. It's just great to have you here in Birmingham. We appreciate you taking time to come by and visit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
And before we talk about your book, tell us about your family, your new family.
Yeah, my growing family. Just 2 weeks ago, my daughter Olive was born. So my wife Shaylin and I are busy nesting right now. This is really my first venture out of the house since she came home with us.
Well, we are honored to have you here, and I know you'll want to get back there, so we'll get you in and out after we cover everything about your incredible book that we love so much.
Sounds good.
That you have spent the last 5 years of your life researching and writing, I think, about one of the most controversial figures in American history. And in what may be the greatest juxtaposition for the genesis of a book I've ever heard, let's talk about your visit to Selma, Alabama on March 7th, 2015. Why were you there?
March 7th, 2015, that's 50 years to the day since the march that's come to be known as Bloody Sunday, where nonviolent demonstrators were attacked on Selma's Edmund Pettus Bridge at the height of the civil rights movement during the voting rights campaign. Images of that attack beamed into homes across the nation and helped really catalyze support for the Voting Rights Act that was passed later that year, and it's really an iconic moment of the civil rights movement. And Selma commemorates that anniversary with a crossing of the bridge each year. So on the 50th anniversary of that day, President Obama was in town to mark the occasion with a speech and to cross that bridge. And so I was there to report on that anniversary. As you might imagine, President Obama's in town. A whole lot of other people showed up too. And that small city is suddenly overflowing with people, and parking was at a premium. So,
Got it. So your first job is finding a place to park your car.
That's right.
And that's where it all began. And so tell us, where did you park your car? And then after you tell us about a simple little thing of parking your car, describe the next few minutes after parking your car.
Sure. So way more than I bargained for. So Selma has, just near downtown, a pretty expansive cemetery, one of those cemeteries with, that has its own system of roads. So I think, maybe there's a place I could sort of stash my car in over there. So I pull into the cemetery and happen to notice these signs all across the cemetery that says, Confederate Memorial Circle closed, do not trespass. And that's catnip to a reporter. So that piques my interest, and so I wander over there. Some people doing work, sort of maintenance work on that section of the cemetery, and I meet this group of people who call themselves the Friends of Forest. Now, I'm a Yankee. I wasn't schooled on military history growing up. Nathan Bedford Forrest's name faintly rang a bell, but not much beyond the association with Forrest Gump. But boy, did they give me an education in Forrest. And this group had basically spent the better part of 2 decades fighting to put up and then replace a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest, who to them is I'm blanking on the word here. To them is a revered military general, sort of salt of the earth, blue-collar hero, known as the Wizard of the Saddle. But he was also a slave trader. He was also an accused war criminal during the Civil War, and afterwards served as the first Grand Wizard of the Klan. So you can imagine putting a statue of him up would be controversial anywhere. To do it in Selma, which is, synonymous with black voting rights, is, all the more so.
On that day.
And to be out there in public, getting ready to put up a replacement statue of Forrest on the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, like you say, is just an incredible juxtaposition. I sort of got whiplash from the dissonance of it. But, that moment, of course, then stayed with me. This chance encounter with the Friends of Forrest really stuck with me and prompted me to look into Forrest's life, read up about this controversial monument.
In and read up, you spend a half a decade looking in and reading up. And for those in our audience who might not know, because of the title of your book, calling Nathan Bedford Forrest the devil was first attributed to William Tecumseh Sherman and has been repeated for generations, but certainly for different reasons. Prior to getting down with that devil's bones, let's talk about some other bones that are really buried in that Selma cemetery. There's so much in your book that is fascinating, and one of the most fascinating characters was Elodie Todd Dawson. Tell us about Elodie Todd Dawson.
So Elodie Todd Dawson grew up in Kentucky, and you might recognize that name Todd there. She was Mary Todd Lincoln's half-sister. And so while Mary married that ambitious lawyer from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln, Elodie married Nathaniel Dawson, who was an Alabamian, a secessionist, a Confederate soldier. They met at the Jefferson Davis's inauguration as the president of the Confederacy, and exchanged letters throughout the war. Elodie actually sewed the flag that Nathaniel's unit marched off to war.
Read that. Fascinating.
And after the war, Elodie became a leader in a group called the Ladies Memorial Association, a predecessor to what we now know as the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
We'll talk about those ladies shortly.
Yes, and so she was helped organize what became Confederate Memorial Circle, which is the place that I met the Friends of Forrest some 150 years later. But she was a real advocate for what we now call the lost cause vision of the Civil War and Reconstruction, that painted the antebellum South as a place with benevolent masters and happy enslaved people, and that saw black leadership in Reconstruction as inept and corrupt. A vision of our history that really took hold, but that doesn't really bear out when you take a square look at the facts. But it proved incredibly influential. A lot of like Elodie and the Ladies Memorial Association, United Daughters of the Confederacy groups across the South, really ran a campaign to spread that vision, that lost cause vision of the Civil War and Reconstruction in textbooks, and of course in helping to build these Confederate monuments that started to go up after the war.
We'll talk about the daughters in just a moment. I read in the book that Elodie had 3 brothers killed in battle at Shiloh, Vicksburg, and Baton Rouge, and her sister Emily's husband died at Chickamauga, and of course her half-sister Mary's husband died at Ford's Theater. What a book. As we get to your lead character, your readers learn that statues of Nathan Bedford Forrest abound in a lot of places other than Alabama. And I love that you point out there are 31 markers of the general just north in Tennessee. And in that same chapter, you let us know that although 3 presidents are from Tennessee, statues of all those 3 presidents combined don't come close to equaling the devil. Tell us and remind us of the 3 Tennessee presidents.
So the 3 Tennessee presidents are Andrew Johnson, Polk, and Andrew Jackson, and yeah, their legacy, at least in terms of public symbols and historical markers, don't equal up to the ways that Forrest still exists on our roads and courthouse squares and interstate shoulders. Forrest is really everywhere. When I talked to the novelist Madison Smart Bell, who has written a novel about Forrest, a great novel about Forrest called Devil's Dream, he told me that growing up in Middle Tennessee, Forrest was just the water that you swam in. That he really sort of saturates the lore and the historical markers of that state.
It's all fascinating. Let's take a light moment from all this history and revisionist history and allow me to get personal for a moment. We read that you were the only white kid in your kindergarten back home in Pennsylvania. And so when parts were assigned for the play about Rosa Parks, naturally, the teacher thought you would be perfect as
the arresting officer.
And that's just so appropriate to the history that many hold dear, that the white kid is the arresting officer. You uncovered quite a battle over Forrest at the second largest university in Tennessee. I found that also, I've used the word fascinating so many times. Let's chat a moment about that university fight.
Yeah, so that fight took place at Middle Tennessee State University, which is in Murfreesboro, and they have a long history of using symbols of Forrest and of the Confederacy more broadly. In the 1960s, their mascot was a student who would dress up as Nathan Bedford Forrest and would ride a horse on the sidelines of football games. They had a big medallion of Forrest on horseback that hung in the student center for decades. He used to be on their stationery. He's strewn through their yearbooks. And basically, as that university integrated in the 1960s, black students started to really challenge the university on their use of those symbols of Forrest and of the Confederacy, and slowly but surely were able to make change in that regard, not using Forrest as the mascot anymore, not playing Dixie as a fight song with the pep band, taking down that medallion. Finally, the sort of last outpost that Forrest had on that school's campus was Forrest Hall, which is the name of the ROTC building there. And in the 2015-2016 academic year, coming out of the aftermath of the Charleston 9 murders, as across the country, people were protesting Confederate symbols. On MTSU, that meant protesting Forrest Hall. And so student activists on campus really mounted a challenge to get the school to change the name of that, and sustained pressure throughout that school year, and eventually got the school to agree to change the name, the Board of Regents that oversees the university to agree to change the name, but that wasn't enough to get it. There's a state law in Tennessee that requires any change to monuments or memorials of historical value to get the approval of the state's historical commission. And so the school applied and were denied permission to change the name. So Forest Hall is still Forest Hall at MTSU.
You write that the revisionist history of the lost cause was perpetrated long after the war by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, that this group sponsored essay contests and erected monuments, goodness, all over the place, and more importantly, wrote school textbooks. It sounds to me like they waged a more successful campaign than did the Army of Northern Virginia.
Yeah, that's right. I think, the Confederacy suffered a military defeat, but their ideology long outlived Appomattox, and the ripples of that, like you say, come out really far, and in many different ways. And that ideology that has us think about the antebellum South through rose-tinted glasses, benevolent masters and contented enslaved people. It was perpetuated, but really doesn't bear out when you scrutinize it and hold it up to historical facts. So yeah, I mean, that campaign that the UDC was central to has really held for long over a century now.
To this day.
To this day, that's right.
Don't imagine you would want to argue the point with many folks who are believers.
Well, there's been plenty of arguing for sure. I mean, I think it's hard. Part of what's hard about it is that we have not settled on a single collective way of remembering the Civil War. I mean, our collective memory about that is not so collective, really. I mean, I think we have two really disparate versions of looking at the Civil War, and our inability to come to terms on how to remember the Civil War, why it was fought, and the consequences of why it had to be fought, mean that we're going to keep having arguments like this, until we can settle it.
If enough people read your book, that will help go a long way.
Well, I hope so.
One of the great prizes of the work these organizations have accomplished is the longest constitution on the face of the earth, the Alabama Constitution of 1901, and the politicos at the time stated their motivation was to establish white supremacy. And for all these 119 years, it seems to have fulfilled its purpose. Talk just for a minute about that document, please.
Yeah, so after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, it did really seem possible that we might overcome the legacy of being a slave society and fully invest in a multiracial democracy where the formerly enslaved people were included, vested political power, the right to vote. But that didn't last but about 10 years, and after Reconstruction, all of those rights were clawed back, and in the decades since, states like Alabama rewrote their constitutions, and as Alabama did in 1901, did so with the explicit purpose of re-enshrining white supremacy in the state, which meant things like disenfranchising Black Americans and really betraying the possibilities of Reconstruction, and meaning that even though, like we were saying, even though the North had won the Civil War, that ideological victory stayed with the Confederates.
While this is a serious book about a contentious subject, your writing style embraces what I call deliciously clever humor. Included with the statues, plaques, and monuments dedicated to the memory of the devil, are a couple I think worthy of mentioning here. Tell us about the shrines to where Forrest rested and where he got directions.
So there's a marker outside of Murfreesboro, which is where Middle Tennessee State University is. There's a marker on the roadside there that enshrines this patch of grass on the roadside where Forrest rested. So while he was about to lead a raid on Murfreesboro, saving some of the town leaders from Union soldiers, for which he is revered by some people in Murfreesboro to this day. It was a dawn raid, and so the night before he stopped outside of town to rest, and I guess they tracked down just where he stayed for a little cat nap, and felt compelled to mark that place with a plaque commemorating that rest.
And we in Alabama are very proud of Emma Sampson. Tell us about that plaque.
So Emma
That statue.
Yes, that statue. Emma Sampson was a teenager during the Civil War, and Forrest, who was a cavalry leader, was in hot pursuit of his Union foes, and was looking for a place to cross the Black Creek there, and Emma Sampson, a teenager, gave him directions, pointed out a narrow place there for him and his men to cross, like the place where Forrest rested, a seemingly minor detail of the Civil War, but one that is fiercely remembered by Forrest's admirers. They go to great lengths to document at least the military aspects of his record. And so Emma Sampson honored with a plaque where she's pointing, she's reenacting her
They whipped that away. Without debate, the ugliest statue of Forrest, maybe the ugliest statue of any Confederate officer, or for that matter, any person, place, or thing, is right outside of Nashville. It's gaudy and plastic, and the sculptor continued his work for the cause long after finishing that graven image. There's a whole book waiting to be written about Jack Kershaw. Give us the abbreviated version of the statue and the sculptor.
That's right. So Jack Kershaw really touches on a number of flashpoints in the sort of aftermath of the Civil War, what I call a sort of cold Civil War, where it's not a military conflict anymore, but the struggle about whether white supremacy will be perpetuated in this country in the courtrooms, in school classrooms. Jack Kershaw is central to a number of those battles. So in the 1950s, he led the fight to resist school integration in Tennessee. In the 1990s, he founded a group called the League of the South, which is a neo-Confederate secessionist group. And that's when he sculpted this really astounding and astoundingly ugly statue of Forrest that sits on the roadside of I-65 in South Nashville there. And then sandwiched between those two in the 1970s, he served as James Earl Ray's lawyer, the man who assassinated Martin Luther King. So he's a sort of Zelig type figure who pops up at all these moments of civil rights and Civil War history throughout the decades.
Well, I can't wait to read your book about Jack Kershaw, and while we're talking, we're showing the image of the statue, and it is something to behold. We love your book. It's smart, it's entertaining, it's chock full of information every American needs to know. And as each reader turns the last page, maybe our country will take a step forward in understanding and coming together. Congratulations. We appreciate your taking 5 years of your life to give us this life lesson. Thank you for visiting today, and thank you for signing all our books.
Oh, thank you so much. It means a lot for this book to find readers, and readers like yourself who really take it seriously and ask such thoughtful questions. I appreciate you taking the time and appreciate your support.
Well, I think when it is published and folks get to read it, you will be inundated by thoughtful questions. Signed first editions of Down Along with That Devil's Bones, A Reckoning with Monuments, Memory, and the Legacy of White Supremacy. It may be purchased at alabamabooksmith.com.